Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic American. Before we jump into today's episode, please subscribe to the channel. And if you find this content compelling, take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment. All of that really helps, and I genuinely appreciate the support. Here's a list of things you must have ID to do in America. Buy alcohol or tobacco products, purchase firearms or ammunition, pick up certain medications or health products. Buy lottery tickets, purchase cannabis where it's legal, enter casinos or betting areas, buy mature-rated video games or adult content, open a bank account or cash a check, apply for a credit card or a loan, fly on an airplane, enter a federal building, rent a car, hotel room, or storage unit, sign a lease or mortgage, get a postpaid cell phone plan, apply for government benefits like food stamps, Medicaid, Social Security, or unemployment, donate blood, adopt a pet, pick up held mail or packages at carriers like FedEx or UPS, register at some libraries, hold a permitted protest or rally, enter age-restricted venues like bars or nightclubs. So, color me confused over the controversy surrounding the SAVE Act, a law that basically says you must have valid identification and proof of citizenship to vote. Who doesn't have an ID? Seriously, as an adult American who does not have identification? And here's another question. Should it really be harder to get into a nightclub than it is to vote? Harder to buy a beer than to cast a ballot that helps decide the direction of the country? Let's be honest, our voting system needs an overhaul. I'm not sure what bothers me more, how much I distrust the system itself, or how much I sometimes distrust the level of understanding of the people participating in it. This week gave us two things happening at the same time: the passage of the SAVE Act, and one of the most alarming exchanges I've seen involving an elected official and basic civics. Put those together, and you get a pragmatic American asking a bigger question. What if the SAVE Act doesn't go far enough? The SAVE Act, short for the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, is a federal election bill that changes how Americans register to vote in federal elections. At its core, the bill does one major thing. It requires people to provide documentary proof of U.S. citizenship before they can be registered to vote. Under current systems, voter registration typically relies on an applicant signing a sworn statement, under penalty of perjury, affirming that they are a U.S. citizen. The SAVE Act shifts that process from a system based primarily on sworn attestation to one based on physical documentation. In other words, citizenship would no longer just be declared. It would have to be proven with documents at the time of registration. The law amends the existing National Voter Registration Act of 1993, requiring states to verify citizenship using approved documents, such as a U.S. passport, certain government-issued IDs that indicate citizenship, or a combination of identification and supporting records like a certified birth certificate. The bill also directs states to establish systems that ensure only citizens remain on voter rolls for federal elections, including ongoing processes for identifying and removing non-citizens if discovered. It adds enforcement mechanisms and creates legal consequences for officials who fail to comply. In simple terms, the SAVE Act does not create a new rule about who is allowed to vote. U.S. citizenship has long been required under federal law, but it changes how that requirement is enforced. Instead of relying primarily on sworn declarations and existing state verification methods, it creates a standardized federal requirement centered on documentary proof during registration. As of now, the bill has passed the U.S. House of Representatives and has been sent to the U.S. Senate, where it remains a proposal rather than law. So what does this actually mean in practical terms? If the SAVE Act were to become law, the biggest shift would happen at the point of voter registration. Right now, when you register to vote, you fill out a form. You swear you're a U.S. citizen under penalty of perjury, and the state processes your registration using existing databases and verification systems. It's largely an oath-based system backed by cross-checks. Under the SAVE Act, that changes. Instead of simply swearing you're a citizen, you would need to provide documentary proof of citizenship at the time you register. That means producing a passport, a certified birth certificate, or other qualifying documentation before your registration could be approved for federal elections. For someone who already has those documents readily available, this would likely feel like a minor administrative step, an extra box to check. But it would also affect re-registrations. If you move to a new state, change your name, or update your party affiliation in a way that requires a new registration entry, you may need to go through that same documentation process again, depending on how states implement the law. It also means states would have to tighten their procedures. Election offices would need systems in place to collect, verify, and store proof of citizenship documents. They would be required to ensure that no one is registered for federal elections without that documentation on file. Additionally, the bill directs states to engage in ongoing efforts to identify and remove non-citizens from federal voter rolls if they are discovered. That adds another layer of list maintenance and verification at the administrative level. In short, the practical shift is this. Registration moves from primarily trust and verification to documentation and verification. It formalizes citizenship proof as a mandatory gate at the front end of the process, rather than relying mainly on sworn attestation backed by penalties for lying. For many Americans, it would feel like adding one more document requirement to something that was previously simpler. For election offices, it would mean building and enforcing a more document-heavy registration system. Those are the practical functional changes. The debate around the SAVE Act isn't really about whether only citizens should vote, at least not publicly. Federal law already prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections. The debate is about how you enforce that rule and what trade-offs you're willing to accept along the way. Supporters of the SAVE Act see it as common sense. Their argument is simple. Voting is one of the most important actions a citizen can take in a republic, so proving citizenship with documentation is a reasonable safeguard. They argue that a clear national standard, proof of citizenship at registration, strengthens election integrity and restores public confidence in a system that many Americans no longer trust. To them, this isn't about restricting voters. It's about tightening rules around the process itself. Opponents see it very differently. They point to millions of Americans who may not have immediate access to citizenship or identification documents, passports, certified birth certificates, or paperwork that perfectly matches their current legal names. They warn that minorities, women, younger voters, and older Americans could be disproportionately affected. Critics argue that shifting from an oath-based system to a document-heavy system risks creating barriers that didn't previously exist. Then there's the administrative side of it. Election officials and state governments raise practical questions. How quickly could states adapt? How much extra workload would be created? What happens when documentation doesn't line up cleanly? The debate here isn't philosophical, it's operational. Can a national standard work smoothly across 50 states that currently run elections in very different ways? And beneath all of this sits a larger trust issue. Supporters argue the bill strengthens faith in elections by tightening verification. Opponents argue it risks reducing trust by making voting feel harder or less accessible. Both sides claim they're protecting democracy. They just define the threat differently. Obviously, it's more nuanced than that. There are plenty of wrinkles once you get into the details. But at a high level, that's the debate. Election integrity and consistency, or maximum voter participation, whether identification is fully verified or not. Now, while the debate over voting standards was happening, something else surfaced that hit a completely different nerve. And honestly, it shook a lot of people watching. During a North Carolina House Oversight Committee hearing, State Representative Alan Chesser questioned Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden with a basic civics question: what branch of government he serves under. What followed was one of those moments that makes people pause and rewind. McFadden struggled to answer. He couldn't identify the branch of government he works within. And more strikingly, he appeared not to know that there are 3 branches of government at all. He hesitated, guessed incorrectly, and had to be corrected by lawmakers, who reminded him that as a sheriff, he operates within the executive branch. It was one of those moments that's almost hard to process in real time. Embarrassing, yes, but also surreal. You laugh at first because it feels absurd, and then it ends, and you just sit there thinking, did that really just happen? Now here's why this matters. This wasn't some random person pulled off the street. McFadden is an experienced, widely respected law enforcement professional with a long career in public service. He spent decades as a homicide detective, built a reputation solving difficult cases, and was elected to oversee one of the most powerful local law enforcement offices. And yet, in a public hearing, he appeared uncertain about one of the most basic structural facts of American government: executive, legislative, judicial. Watching that exchange, three thoughts hit me immediately. First, and I'll just say it plainly, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around the idea that an elected official doesn't know the three branches of government or where his own office fits within them. We're not talking about some obscure constitutional trivia. This is Civics 101, the framework every public official operates inside of. Hearing someone with that level of authority struggle to answer that is unsettling. Second, and this is the part that stuck with me, it scared me a little. Because if an elected official can be that uncertain about basic civic structure, what does that say about the rest of the electorate? Let's be honest. A lot of us already suspect that many voters know very little about how government actually works. But it never really dawned on me that the same knowledge gap might exist among the people we elect to run the system itself. At least not at the level we saw in the McFadden exchange. We worry about uninformed voters. We don't often think about uninformed officials, and that realization shifts something. Which leads to the third thought, the one that ties directly back to this entire Save Act conversation. Moments like that make me wonder whether the debate we're having about voting standards is too narrow. Because if the goal is protecting the integrity of democracy, is verifying identity enough? Is proving citizenship the full answer? Or are we staring at a deeper problem? A civic culture where maximum participation is treated as the goal, while almost no attention is paid to whether people understand what they're actually participating in. The SAVE Act focuses on documentation, but what if the larger issue is civic literacy? Watching that exchange didn't just make me think about voter roles. It made me think about competence. It made me think about expectations. It made me think about what it actually means to be a citizen in a constitutional republic. And honestly, it makes me feel like maybe the SAVE Act doesn't go far enough. Let me say this plainly. The SAVE Act is a must. If you are an adult American citizen, proving who you are and proving you're a citizen before voting isn't oppression. It's common sense. It's basic civic hygiene. You need ID to buy alcohol. You need ID to open a bank account. You need ID to fly on an airplane. You need ID to enter federal buildings or pick up a package. But when it comes to deciding the future of the country, suddenly documentation is treated like a moral crisis. I'm done pretending that makes sense. And I'm especially tired of the implication that certain groups of Americans are somehow incapable of maintaining identification or citizenship documentation. Minorities, young people, older Americans, women, the poor. The suggestion that these Americans can't handle basic adult responsibilities isn't compassion. It's condescension. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations masquerading as empathy, a political instinct on the left that often confuses lowering standards with helping people. And honestly, shame on anyone pushing that narrative. Americans across every background hold jobs, sign leases, cash checks, receive benefits, and navigate modern life every single day. To imply they can't maintain documents needed to vote is insulting. If you truly oppose requiring identification, there are really only two positions you can take. Either you believe documentation requirements are too burdensome and should be minimized, or you accept that a system with weak verification increases the risk that non-citizens could slip through. Those are the trade-offs. Now here's where I stand. If an adult citizen loses their ID, if their birth certificate is at their mom's house, if they didn't bother keeping track of their paperwork, that's not the country's fault. That's adulthood. And almost all of that documentation can be replaced. Driver's licenses can be reissued. Birth certificates can be reordered. Passports can be replaced. Naturalization papers can be reprinted. It may take effort. It may take time. It may require a fee. That's adulthood. We expect adults to maintain or replace documents to work, travel, receive benefits, sign contracts, and function in society. Voting determines the direction of all those systems. Expecting the same level of responsibility here is not unreasonable. We want voting adults, not voting children, not voting vibes, voting adults. Now critics shift to the operational argument. They say, how quickly could states adapt? How much extra workload would this create? What happens when documentation doesn't line up cleanly? can a national standard really work across 50 states? Here's my response. States could and should adapt immediately. We live in a modern administrative state capable of processing taxes, benefits, licenses, passports, and digital identity systems at scale. If we can manage all of that, we can manage citizenship verification. As for workload, I don't care. Election integrity is more important than administrative convenience. If that means hiring more staff or updating systems, then do it. That's not a flaw. That's governance. What happens when documentation doesn't line up? We put responsibility on adults to resolve it. And in rare cases where records conflict, we already have procedures, affidavits, corrections, provisional mechanisms to address discrepancies. We don't weaken standards because paperwork sometimes requires effort. And can it work across 50 states? It's not working smoothly now. The current patchwork system breeds confusion and suspicion. National elections deserve national standards. Standardization builds clarity. Clarity builds trust. Trust builds legitimacy. So yes, the SAVE Act is necessary. It protects the front door. But I don't think it goes far enough. Because documentation solves one problem, identity. It does not solve another, deeper problem, competence. That's why the McFadden moment hits so hard. When an elected official doesn't even know there are 3 branches of government, that's not just embarrassing, it's a warning sign. And if that level of civic ignorance exists among leadership, what does that say about the broader culture? We have a civic literacy crisis. Now let me be crystal clear. I'm not calling for abolishing any amendments. I'm not talking about repealing voting protections. I'm not talking about property requirements or wealth tests. I'm talking about a basic middle school level civics test. How many branches of government are there? What are they called? Who writes laws? Who enforces them? Who interprets them? That's not ideology, that's structure. Because voting is not just a right, it's responsibility. And rights detached from responsibility eventually collapse under their own weight. If you're going to help decide tax policy, foreign wars, school systems, criminal law, and constitutional questions, you should at least understand the basic architecture of the government you're steering. Not legal theory, not partisan doctrine, middle school civics. The SAVE Act protects the front door. Civic literacy protects the foundation. You want a healthy democracy? Then prove you're a citizen and prove you understand the basics of what you're voting for. Because the ballot is power. And power without responsibility isn't democracy. It's chaos wearing a sticker that says, I voted. Thanks for watching. If this episode gave you something to think about, don't let the conversation end here. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Like the episode, leave a comment and share it if you think someone else would like to hear the perspective. Because the goal isn't noise, it's honest thought and discussion. Thanks again. Until the next time.